And now, without further ado, you know, a lot of people make a lot of big deals about characters, creatures, and other things, but these guys here, we're going to talk about the art of the main titles, okay? And there's an art form in all kinds of ways, presenting things. We got from Elastic Studios. We're going to have, first and foremost, put your hands together for Joe Paniagua. And that's just fancy for bread and water in Spanish.
No.
I was having a moment looking at it phonetically, and I was like, what? Paniagua? And I was like, Paniagua. And then you said bread and water. I was like, yeah, Paniagua. It's like one of those things, you know? I know that note on the guitar. It's fine. Okay. Jose Limon.
Yeah.
Jose Limon. Which is Spanish for lemon.
Limon. Sour.
Lemon.
Dale huevos, which is something else, but we'll get into that later. And Mike Dupree. Put your hands together for the guys from Elastic. And a warm ZBrush welcome. Go ahead, guys.
Can you guys hear me?
Of course.
All right.
Woo, that's me, the Jimi Hendrix experience.
So thank you guys for having us. We represent the modeling teams at A52, BFX, and Elastic. My name is Jose Limon. I am the lead modeler.
I'm Mike Dupree. I'm a freelancer with Elastic.
I'm Joe Paniagua, senior citizen modeler, and I also am a freelancer at Elastic.
So we just want to start off by giving a big shout out to the entire Pixologic team for hosting such an awesome event. It really is an honor for us to be here sharing the stage with some of the most influential artists in that community, some of whom actually represent the top leading studios in the industry. So again, thank you guys. And we hope that you guys, we hope everyone here leaves inspired by all the presentations, and hopefully we can spark a little bit of that inspiration by what we're about to show you guys. Woo!
We love you too.
So at Elastic, we work on anything from television to film to game cinematics and trailers, ads and commercials, and of course, our very own animated shorts and main titles, which is what we're here to talk to you guys about. And show you a little bit of how we use ZBrush to produce some of the most iconic sequences that I think have aired in the last decade in modern television. So we've prepared a special reel for you guys. We hope you guys enjoy. Is there audio?
Lit.
Play it again.
All right. Playing again.
No.
All right, so why main titles and what makes them so unique? We feel like a captivating sequence. It's an integral part of how audiences experience the story. It's an introduction to the characters, the world, and the themes of the show. And as CG artists, part of our job is to be able to translate that vision and the creative direction into a fully realized and fully fleshed out digital representation of what it is and what it means. And in terms of production, in VFX, we're not any similar from animation or features or games. For the most part, we share the same process. But I think the major thing for us is the time limitations that we have to work with. It definitely is very fast-paced, and we have to be able to adapt and be as efficient as possible. And so that means that we have to take shortcuts. We're definitely going to do that to get to the final result. And one of the shortcuts has become the process of kit bashing. And this is something that has become a common practice for us. If we know early on that we're working on a specific model that's going to have deformation or some sort of animation, and we know we have a base geometry that we know works well with rigging and deformation, we're always going to go back and reuse all those elements. And if we know part of the character or model we're working is not considered a hero element, or it's going to be used as a background piece, and if we don't have that in our library, we'll resort to buying assets online and then breaking them up to meet our set standards. And sometimes we use that for just textures. Sometimes it's just for a base geometry that will get us a head start. Or sometimes we just need some silhouette in the shot, so we just grab those and put it in place. And of course, if we're dealing with likeness of a specific character and the client provides us with scan data, we'll take that and I'm going to ZBrush, do some cleanup, and then get that going through the pipes and get things going for the project. And of course, the best part, and this is where we try to spend most of our time, is hand sculpting, because that's really where the fun is, right? We want to stay there as much as possible. But due to time limitations, we try to optimize so that we can get 80% of the work by kit bashing, and the rest of the work we actually try to focus on hero pieces that need that kind of attention. So for the Westworld sequence, this was the primary approach. Early on, we knew, based on style frames and creative direction, that we were going to create multiple characters that were going to have anatomy exposed. Early on, we didn't know what that was going to be. So for us to cover all our bases, we decided to create a master file that had as much anatomical detail as possible. This really allowed us to optimize every section, and so when it came time to work on the hero elements in the sequence, we could always pull from this file and then transfer it to our pose models. And again, this was put together via kit bashing from various sources. Some of it we sculpted ourselves, and the rest, you just recycled geo. And all the detailing of the anatomy happened at this stage before we even moved on to the hero characters. So the next two characters that are featured in the sequence are the mother and her newborn baby. We started this two in T-pose to figure out the overall proportions and the feel. And the idea for these two was to create a bonding experience. It was also to reference the show of how the hosts were starting to become aware of what and who they were in the story of Westworld. So once we figured out the proportions, the next thing was to move into posing. And what you see here is the final pose for the mother and the newborn. Most of our attention was focused on her face and her upper body, since we knew that the feet were going to be exposing part of the anatomy, so that wasn't really as important. And this next frame shows you a breakdown of the actual final model and the separation of the skeleton and the anatomy. So once we had our post and it was all approved, we then brought the skeleton first, got that working with our post. We use regular transpose tools to do all the posting in ZBrush with some manual move tools and rotate and translate. Once the skeleton and was working with the pose, we then started bringing the muscle groups one at a time from our anatomy master file. And then the rest was just going in there and cleaning by hand and sort of sculpting on the pose. And here's a close-up again. We only brought those elements that we needed, just in case we needed to change aspects of how the skin and anatomy reveal happened. And here you see the final character. This is what we handed off to the lighting and animation team. This is also a water-type mesh. So after we had our final sculpt, we created a Dynamesh version using the remesh features under the subtool menu, and also Dynamesh. And we created this mainly because we didn't want to deal with displacement, and this was also going to be rendered in Octane for Cinema 4D, and our pipeline wasn't really established the way we usually work with V-Ray. So it was easier for us to just decimate and Dynamesh the model and hand it off, and try to bake all those maps. And here's a close-up of the model. And just you can see the amount of detailing that went into it. And again, most of the detailing happened in the anatomy master file, and the rest was us just creating the transition from the skin to the muscles. And I'll be demoing you guys how we did that. So I just want to recap. We created a master file with all the anatomy. We then posed the actual hero character. We brought in all the anatomy into the pose model, created our transition, and once that was working, we then created that water type mesh with Dynamesh. And once that was looking solid, we then decimated that model, and the UVs happened after the decimation was complete. And here it is in frame. As you can see, it's very silhouette driven. So for this next character, this one was a lot easier to build. It was done in the same approach, but this one was a one-off, so we had a little more flexibility. We created the kit bash in the same file, then we just sculpted the final version in the same file. And here's the breakdown. Again, we started with the previous model because he was working well in the shot. The scaling was already set up, so it just made it easier for us to start from that. Then you see the first pass sculpt. That was done so we can figure out what the anatomy looked like under all that fur. So that gave us an idea and a starting point. And then in the bottom, you see the breakdown of the anatomy and the skeleton structure, and the final at the top right. And fun fact about this guy, we actually recycled the horse that we built for season 1. Since we already had all the elements in place, we just took that and morphed it into a bison. So that saved us some time too. And here it is in frame. And again, the rest of the characters went through the similar production workflow. And I want to show you guys how we created that skin transition. So here's the model. Just gonna go around it so you guys can see. Just want to show you guys that it's built as a shell.
It's amazing. That's just one shell.
It took a little while to figure it out, but once we got the process going, it definitely made it a lot simpler. And technically, we could probably 3D print this model, and it wouldn't be too bad. Maybe subtle cleanup, and it'll be good to go. So I'm going to show you guys how we created this kind of effect.
I don't think we got the copyrights printed out.
Probably not. So here is, I will consider this the final pose of the character. As you can see, I have subdivisions. So they made it easy for posing. So the next step to create the transition to be able to project this detail onto that, we duplicated the skin and Dynameshed it as high as possible so that we wouldn't lose any fidelity of the high-res sculpt. And then the next step is to use morph targets so that we can work non-destructively, but also use that as a way to sculpt back all our details from our original skin detailing. I'm just going to quickly store a morph target. And we actually just used the ZBrush tool to start projecting back onto that. Let me turn on my anatomy, grab something. So you can see we start to graph the underlying anatomy. And then the first passage, you're just trying to get the geo as close as possible. We'll just do normal smoothing to relax it a little bit, or we can always do a polish as well. Works pretty good. And then just go back in there and try to find a pretty cool pattern, something that works naturally. And then we'll switch to our morph brush and then start morphing some of the skin. It also gives you a nice effect, kind of like a fat layer. So if you can get creative, you can create some cool effects that feels fleshy and sort of creates that bridge between the two.
It's kind of gross, I like it.
It is gross.
It was awesome.
And also, if you want to get a little more in depth, you can change the alpha on your morph brush to add some more, some type of noise. So then you can start getting pretty interesting results. We can also mess with our Z-project settings, maybe turn down the intensity and the shift to start grabbing a broader range, but not really deform too much. So that's something to play with also. So at the end, we ended up with something looking like this. And at this point, I would consider this my final sculpt. It's approved. The next step is to decimate it, and that's pretty straightforward. You just decimate normal settings, and we try to keep it as low as possible. Again, because this was going to be, we weren't going to be using displacement, so whatever we got is what was rendered in shot. And a good way to know how low we were going to go, at least I personally had to be able to see the artifact in the triangulation, otherwise it wasn't low enough. And from there, we gave it a couple of levels of detail higher in case they wanted to do close-ups. So the next step was to create the UVs, and we did that using masking. And the idea is that you're creating your UV shells in the way that you mask. So for example, this would be my seam right here. If I want to create a UV here, that would be my other UV island and patch. And we did that by masking, and then we went to polygroups and group masking. Where it is? Actually, it's right here, group mask. And you see it starts to give you, you start cutting it up in sections. Again, we'll probably mask the top from the bottom so we have more control. And what you end up is with something that looks like this. If I isolate each piece, you can see how we cut it up. So we did this process for the entire character, so obviously that took a lot longer to get a clean cut. From here, once you have your polygroups assigned, you go to UV Master and turn on polygroups. And once you unwrap, you get something that looks like this. And then here, if you want to tweak it some more, since we already have polygroups, we can just isolate each patch, tweak it, and it'll retain these changes. And then we can just go back to our unflattened version, and that would be our UVs, and this is what we would hand out to animation and lighting. And that's it for me, guys.
Good stuff.
Want to take a couple questions while you're switching up?
Sure.
Oh, go for it.
Buddy? Anybody? For a moment, it looked like my grandmother when she was like, when I was a kid, she used to make this pot of like tripe. You know what I mean?
Tripas are delicious.
Yeah. Oh, stop it. Yes.
He passed me the
I
wine.
knew you were gonna say that. I knew it.
In terms of like client feedback with anatomy like that, I can imagine that would be kind of a tricky, fine line to juggle. How was the process on that?
It definitely took back and forth. Also with the creative direction, they had a certain idea they wanted to hit. So once we handed off a version of the model, they had tweaks to the posing, and maybe they wanted to expose a little more of the model. So definitely having that anatomy master file as its own thing helped us, because if we had to redo part of it, we quickly go and grab that and just resculpt it and move along and send that off. So it had some flexibility.
Cool. Anybody else? One more? Okay.
Like that laziness is key for a project like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Shortcuts.
Yeah, shortcuts.
Well, efficiency. You know, lazy gets thrown around in a very derogatory kind of way.
I feel like it gets a bad term, but
Yeah,
I love
like
it.
lazy mouse, I feel like it's efficient mouse. You know what I mean?
Efficient.
For a project like Westworld or Game of Thrones, where it's like a very specific look that they're going for, like for the main title, does that art direction come from from your studio, or does that come more from the client?
I mean, part of it is from the client, but the initial pitch, the idea comes from the studio. So they create various pitches, they pitch that to the client, and then once they choose one specific look, then they start honing down on that look, and then they refine the concept. And as soon as part of that gets approved, then we get started on building assets for that.
Also, just amazing. I
Thank
love
you.
the Westworld stuff so much.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You can put your hands together again. Yeah. Typically, that's probably the strategist, right? That sells that idea to the firm, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah, strategist. I have a friend who's a strategist. Anyway, go ahead. We'll talk later.
All right, is that the last question for now?
Yeah,
All right.
go.
So, again, my name is Mike Dupree. I'm a freelancer with Elastic. I've been with them for on and off for about 4 years now. And what Jose kind of talked about is more of a straightforward approach for our workflow. And what I'm going to talk about today is, at least for me, was definitely like one of the weirder challenges I've had in my entire career.
It was definitely very weird.
Yeah, it was very weird, which is just making an entire world out of Oreo cream for our Game of Thrones Oreo crossover commercial.
Both iconic and delicious.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
We went through a disgusting amount of Oreos
many
for
Oreos.
research
So many.
purposes.
So many Oreos for...
They actually, you don't even taste it after a while. You just absorb the
You
knowledge.
just start...
And that's all you get. But
not noticing that anymore.
I was fortunate enough to be tasked with the majority of the modeling on our Oreo job, but that is not to say that I didn't have a tremendous amount of help from our brothers up here today. So one of the first things when we get a job in at the studio is just kind of breaking it down and even figuring out how to dissect it and tackle it. And so I tend to start with just very, very basic questions, and it's, what's the project? What do we need to make? What's
am I
the
doing
story? Yeah. It's like, how are we even telling that story? And what do we need to better enforce and tell our client's story? And, how do you kind of take that information and then work efficiently from there? And so for Oreos, obviously, we had to make a lot of Oreos. So
So many
I started
Oreos.
so many cookies. I started very basically. This is the base Oreo mesh here. And, there wasn't anything really groundbreaking or anything about making this model. It was very straightforward. It was poly modeled and then brought in a ZBrush. One thing I love doing, it was actually a technique I learned from Jose a couple years ago, is just kind of using your poly groups as selection sets to do other things, or your UVs to be your poly groups or your selection sets. It's kind of this weird amorphous thing that's very powerful. So on the left here, you can see that's just my base mesh, and those are my poly groups, and those are also what wound up driving the UVs going forward. And we just had to ensure that there was, no stretching and just keeping it very, just maintaining the integrity of the client's product at all times. It's pretty much Oreo porn.
Because they want their Oreos to look delicious at all times.
And another thing that can happen in a pipeline like this is when you're kind of doing what Jose touched on and, reusing one asset to generate others, if there's an error in that initial mesh, then it's going to propagate throughout your pipeline. And then you don't just have one bunk Oreo, you've got like 17,000 or something. So, just kind of dotting your I's and crossing your T's, making sure there aren't, egregious triangles or anything in your meshes. And then I was also working on the bag for the end tag here, and this is the frame from the final piece. And again, just nothing, nothing too outside of the box, just straightforward poly modeling, and then just giving it like the ZBrush magic, just trying to lock in, just get as much detail as you can in one subdivision, staying patient with yourself, going up, not just subdividing it to like 90 subdivisions like some people like to do.
Yeah.
And, giving yourself more problems than you need. But it was a fun sculpt, believe it or not. It was straightforward, but it was kind of the calm before the storm with what we were tasked to do next, which was creating a ground out of Oreo cream.
That was tough.
Is literally one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do creatively in my life.
It was beyond hard.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, like, we've been doing this for a while, and like we get a lot of varied jobs that come in the shop.
Yeah.
But it's usually something we can kind of throw our heads together for 30 minutes or whatever, kind of
some
figure out a
R&D.
workflow.
Yeah.
And then we kind of, put together an attack plan and things go from there. But for this, we were all kind of like looking at each other like,
How do we start this?
what do we do?
The ground was almost like, the direction was like trying to sculpt a feeling.
Yeah.
And to tell you the truth, if somebody tells you to sculpt a feeling, that's a very hard thing to hit.
It's a very amorphous target.
Yes.
And so, where we really just started was with good reference. And we were shooting photography of Oreos, absorbing the knowledge from Oreos, not tasting them at all. And I mean, the client had even sent us a bag of Oreo cream, which ultimately I don't think wound up being very useful. It was a lot more liquid than you would think. I don't want to get into it, but
It also just,
we were breaking down, like, looking at cake frostings, cupcake frostings, different stylings. And that basically just led us to about a week or 2 weeks worth of R&D, which is something that our schedules don't tend to bless us with. It's a lot of just make an attack plan and go.
yeah.
But this time we were fortunate enough to just be able to kind of put together a set of brushes and approaches that would give us something that was more believable. And these are, I consider all three of these failures in the end, but they yielded tools and breakthroughs that help us put together something that, wound up influencing the final piece. So what we have here in the top left, this is the final ground piece of geo for the Oreo creamed version of Westeros. And on the lower right side here, we have the entirety of the scene. So this orange part here, that's our ocean, and then inlaid in it is the ground, and that little gray blip you see there is King's Landing. I'll show you a little bit more on that.
I think it was Cookies Landing.
Oh, yeah. There were like silly pun names for all sorts of things.
That's a fun part.
Yeah.
So in here we have just a top-down view of the land, the ocean. This is Joe's wall here on the, I don't know, can you see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's, it was a mammoth task, but Joe and I were fortunate enough that we were R&Ding side by side. So he was trying brushes, or building his own brushes rather, I was building my own. And we would kind of pass them off back and forth.
Yeah.
I will be the first to admit it. He knows much more about brush customization than I do. I like to brute force my way through my problems, which is a terrible thing, and I would not suggest doing it. But work smarter, don't just necessarily work harder, And so what we have here is just a patch of King's Landing. And one of the things that we ran into with this project that was difficult was it was so much land and it needed to be so detailed, but the poly count was getting disgusting. I don't remember what the final poly count was for the entire mass, but some shots just needed more detail than what the entirety of the mesh could provide. So we just started cutting out patches. So this red piece here is just kind of showing you what the lower right image is zoomed in on. So this was like a StarCraft map almost. This is like the red's where the action's happening. Lower right side is the sexy stuff. And then here on the left corner is just again, a top-down slice of what some of those details were that we had to add in. And it was just kind of a back and forth with the lighters, just talking to them and trying to see what was reading in the camera and what wasn't. Another thing that was challenging was that all of this terrain was white. It's like literally the most difficult material to work with. It blows out almost any light you shine on it. So it's just a matter of,
Same thing with details.
Yeah.
Those
like
details were just
you can put
disappear.
tons of detail in, but it's so reflective at points. Your light source is kind of your best friend and your enemy. But I will go into a little ZBrush action for you all, and I just want to go over just kind of what my thought process was as I was working my way through this guy. So what we have here, this is a patch that's cut around King's Landing. Oop. So this is King's Landing here. And then our camera was very, very tight in on this little area around there. So we would just work, like any kind of sculpting 101, right? You want to work from your big shapes to your medium shapes, smaller shapes, and not just working additively, but also carving in and trying to get some interesting action going on. So if I was to get into the ground plane here, and I haven't used the default layout in 100 years, but I'm gonna rock with you all. There we go. So if I was gonna try and make this into a believable, more believable landscape, you know, let's say we want to put some happy mountains over here, Bob Ross style. Shout out to Bob Ross. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him.
It's our painter's state of art.
Yes. But again, I try and put my base shapes down on just a lower subdivision. I'm sure you've all heard that before. Don't get too trigger happy when subdividing. I don't want to distract you, but that's
Nice.
Incredible.
It's beautiful. Could we
If
put
he
that
were
up on the screen?
alive today, I'm sure he would be ZBrushing at some point. Or maybe poly painting, I'm not sure, but.
Definitely be poly painting.
So I just, the thing that was also difficult for this is just having two sets of reference. I mean, we're getting reference from a client of what Westeros looks like and how to build up these kind of topological forms, but we're also getting references of cakes and pies and stuff. So you're like,
How to immerse the
how
two.
do I make this work? And it just became a process of just sitting down and figuring out what it was that we liked. Why does this swirl on this cake feel nice? And what do these shapes evoke in a landscape? And what can we turn into a mountain? What's a valley? But it was actually it was fun at a certain point, but terrifying in the beginning, like a lot of projects, I guess. Yeah, it was just a matter of really trying to stay patient and sculpting in momentum. One of the big goals for this is we really wanted people to be kind of confused whether or not they were looking at something that was CG or stop motion. And a lot of that's just feeling and momentum, right? Like if you were gonna build this out in real life, you would have to imagine yourself sitting here with a spatula. It's like, all right, well, where am I moving my material to? Where is it piling up? Where am I taking it away from? And not to say that this is, I don't think this would hold up to like a Houdini simulation or something, to a world built out of Oreo cream necessarily, but I was definitely trying to think about just where I'm redistributing my material to and just kind of keep track of, just my clay, as it were.
My favorite thing of this project was seeing Mike over here space sculpt mountains as he's looking at the screen, like if he was actually shaping in real life.
Yeah, I do a lot of that. I steal that from a lot of the good animators I've worked with over my career. You just see them like, I don't know, Spider-Manning in the hallway, and you're like, what is he doing?
Reference.
But yeah,
Reference.
it's all internal. There's always a method to the madness.
Whatever works.
It works.
I'm not gonna take this to completion. I'm definitely not known for my sculpting speed, but just trying to get something fun that'll look like a fun little cliff face if we were zoomed in. Just imagine like Luke Skywalker, Jamie Lannister swooping down this side plane. Star Wars on the brain, my bad. Don't do that. Don't cross your IPs. And then I just want to show you a little bit before I pass it off to my brother Joe P. of the awesome set of brushes that he wound up compiling for us. And the thing that I love about,
Give it a minute.
it's big, yeah.
Give
just
it a
gotta-
minute.
A lot of that
You
happens.
just gotta believe.
Sorry, I should have optimized it. I didn't learn that I could optimize the brushes until like after this project.
We learned a lot on this
Yeah,
project.
because you know how they were making fun of me. Some of these brushes were made subdividing them to like 10 million polys or over like 10 million polys.
So the thing that's nice about this, though, is it can just give you some really fun secondary shapes in certain areas. And it's not I don't think any brush should ever be a one-stop shop for any artist, right? It's something to go off of or something to integrate into what you've already got going on, but you kind of need to take some liberties with it and, get your masking in there and be selective with where you're sprinkling that magic around. All right, there we go. Soften this guy up. And just getting these little fun pock marks and stuff in there. Yeah, if you have any brush making questions, I would definitely not ask me and point those at Joe P over here. I've learned quite a bit chatting up with him about any and all things brushes and layer related. Yeah, this is a fun one. Did you steal this from like a slice of ice cream or something?
Yeah, I found a very high-res picture of ice cream. I actually brought it in as an image and just like inflated it out and then sculpted on top of that. And it looked like photorealistic ice cream. And that's how that was made. And that's why it looks like such delicious ice cream.
Jose has a good habit of not over smoothing his surfaces. You like to like switch your shift even to like flatten and polish, right?
I just don't smooth. I just switch my brush to flatten, and I just flatten instead of smoothing. Kind of gives me more of a polished look rather than just smoothing all your strokes. So it's definitely, for me, it's been an awesome way of working. So I definitely recommend you guys just switch the default brushes and see you can play with different effects. So you never know what you get.
That's pretty crazy. Not a lot of people know that if you get good enough, you could actually use a flattened brush as a smooth brush.
I mean, it's all about planes, right? Plane changes, finding interest, not filling up on Oreos. There we go.
Delicious, delicious Oreos. Man, this is making me hungry.
Yeah, and then just before I hop out of this file and pass it off, I just want to show you what the beginning, middle, and end. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Want to include the people at home while
course.
while
Love
they're
our
actually
digital
eating
family.
the Oreos and you and I are salivating over them. Somebody somewhere is sucking back a pack of Oreos. No, I trained for this event. I told you. After this is over, Oreos. Let's see here. This is coming from a Twitch viewer, and the name is
PogChamp.
what is it?
PogChamp. You're not on Twitch?
No, it's 3D.
Never mind. It's a
Yes,
it's a Twitch
3D
guy.
AOist. Can you talk about the thought process of designing the cookie architecture and how you chose the relative scale of the cookies to the scene?
So that
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually.
that is a very good question. Scale was something we had to spend a lot of time talking about on Oreo. It was a matter of getting it to feel as though it could be a miniature set, but also read as like having the scale of an actual cinematic landscape. So I think we decided to keep the Oreos themselves at real world scale. That was kind of our
That was our scale reference.
yeah, the metric that we scaled everything
Yeah.
else by. And then it just turned into kind of just building out from there. I can zoom in on this cookie landing here. I spent much more time making Oreos than building structures. The structures were built by our awesome layout artist, Amelia, I believe. She's great. Thank you. I definitely haven't had enough cookies making this stuff yet. But yeah, so this is actually just an import of V-Ray proxies that I brought in, just a base to go off of, something that was low poly enough, but gave me enough of an idea where I needed to build form up around. But yeah, there we go. I was actually not tasked with the making of the cool buildings, just the bricks, I guess, that they were constructed with, so to speak. So as to the rhyme or the reason of how she made them look so cool, it's just being rad, I guess, having a good eye. She also used a lot of reference, and I'm pretty sure Brian worked on that as well. And
I
they
think
both
Brian
have
was
worked on Game
about
of
it.
Thrones
Definitely
also.
a team effort. So
Yeah,
it took a lot of people.
this was not just us three. We have a whole squad of awesome artists we collaborate with, but
We're always in constant communication with each other because
Yeah.
we gotta, like Jose was saying, we got a very small time, like we have a very small window. It's not like a movie where we could spend like months and months on something. So a lot of it is like, as we're building it and testing it out, like somebody else is already kind of starting to animate it, even though it's not finished, which is kind of a weird process of thinking of.
Just parallel, getting everything to work.
Yeah.
And move
Right.
forward.
And so before I hop out, I'm just going to show you this patch here. You see how this little cliff is a little pixelated? So the version that I pulled out for this file isn't the final, but even still in this file's most finished version, it wasn't enough resolution. The camera, if you go to even in our opening, it's right on that cookie. So we had to, again, cut off a patch from the patch and just subdivide it. And then, so that's what this guy is here. And you know what was hilarious is I spent about 2 days sculpting all this little fun swoopity detail. Can't even see it in the shot. They put Oreo crumbs everywhere, and I was very sad, but
It happens
it's
a lot.
okay. It's the thought that counts.
True. Because if it's not there, then you can definitely tell it's
Exactly,
not there.
that's the thing though, yeah. If like you don't put it in there and then you're kicking yourself because you made the frame weaker overall, and we never want
Yeah.
weak frames, ever.
Yeah.
Cookie time. Cookie
Amen,
time.
catch, man. I'm
You got a
busy.
cookie.
Doing work.
Hey, Mike, can you hear me? I don't know how to. Okay, cool. Thanks. So this is awesome. Two questions. One, can we see the commercial? And then two, can you go into more detail about that Oreo cream bag that they sent you? What happened to that Oreo cream? What was the consistency?
I don't want to know what's in the bag.
The
Wow.
Oreo cream was seriously perverse. Like, you ever see something and you just like wish you could, like that
unsee
Black
it.
Mirror episode
Yeah.
where like you just censor out like disturbing things?
You didn't need to see it.
Yeah, it's just like I didn't need to know that was a thing.
Like every time I come to work at the Noman School on Sunset Boulevard, there's certain things I don't need to see that.
Like, I didn't know you
How's it
could,
been happening in the middle of the day?
right there.
In the middle of me eating. Can you believe this guy? I'm gonna talk to you later, man. You got a question? Here. That's a punt right there.
We just bring that
Wow.
up because the bag magically
That's a
disappeared
punt right there.
away from the studio into someone's belly.
This is disappearing quickly in my belly too.
I wouldn't say this is a critical question, but just one out of genuine curiosity. Regarding the end result for the entire cream landscape, how many vertices did you end up with? How many points did you end up with?
Did it even count?
In ZBrush or in Maya? Like that's another question. Like when we kick it out or
I guess just when you just in ZBrush before you.
I don't know.
and again, so that's the thing. Like it's this geometry that you're seeing is on a shot by shot basis, right? So this land that we're looking at on this frame is totally different than the land we're looking at on this frame, right? So this patch was particularly problematic in that we had to account for the blend shapes of like the Oreos on the far right side rotating. So it was, I don't know, I mean, in terms of verts, maybe the decimated version was like 2 million polys or so. Our lighters have also gotten much more forgiving of our
Yeah.
poly counts as time has
Oh
has
no!
gone on.
Yes, exactly. Like we could give them like millions and millions of polys, and they'll be
They'll
like,
render it.
Yeah,
they'll be able to render it. They'll proxy it later or find a way.
because a lot of
They'll
that
use movie
decision
magic.
making, a lot of it is
Make it
time
work.
dependent, right? So if it would take us a longer time to go back in and lower the poly count of something, rebake out displacement maps for it, it's like you just always have to make a decision based on the time you're gonna lose in doing it, right?
He
Yeah.
said he imagined it being a nightmare to render. I'm sorry, I took the box away from you, man. I got
mean-
carried away with the sugar.
It did take a while, but that's why we optimize as much as we
There's
could.
a focal shifter, like the angle of view on the camera, play into that as well? Or?
For sure. I mean, especially with something when you're playing with like reflectivity, you always have to be mindful of what your cameras are doing. And I have to thank you so much for letting us import cameras.
Yeah, no, it's great.
That's
That is-
life-changing.
You
Oh
seriously
my
don't even
God.
understand. It's like next to being able to
Yes.
Yeah,
life
it's a
changing.
lot easier.
Yeah.
Yup.
So a little round of applause for you. And any other? Whoa, a lot of questions.
Hey, just real quick, did you guys consider using scan data for the cookies? And if not, why?
I don't think we ever thought about using scan data. We knew that the land for the job was going to be so problematic. I just remember like I don't even know who made the call. I got thrown on cookies, and it was pretty much that. It's just like make this now, like.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's based off of time and not the resource because we don't have a scanner in house. We do got a guy that does scanning for us, but if it takes us longer for him to get into the office, scan a cookies, give us a cookie, than it will to actually model a cookie to make it look photoreal, then it's just better to model it,
Talking about like a cylinder.
like
Speaking
sculpting
of
it.
cylinders, you gonna finish that?
Yeah. Oh. These are good
No, across from the
cookies.
front row here.
Like, quick
Okay.
question.
Hello again. What?
No, it's fine.
Right here, yeah? No?
I was just wondering what would the,
Dale,
what's
dale.
the turnaround on that?
On the entire project?
Yeah.
I've been through so many rodeos since then. How long do we have for that? For modeling? Maybe a month?
Say like about a month.
Yeah.
That was about a month.
Yeah.
I know I took way longer than I said I was going to on the ground. I think I gave them like 2 weeks to finish it and probably overshot it by a week.
Yeah, because we started the Oreo spot while we were in the middle of making Game of Thrones Season 8. So it was just a transition from finishing that to Oreo and then finishing the Oreo spot.
By that time, we were seasoned vets and everything Game of Thrones, but not Oreos. Okay, so hello, my name's Joe Paniagua again, and I'm the senior modeler. I was lucky enough to work on Game of Thrones Season 1 and various versions throughout those Game of Thrones, and I was finally lucky enough to work on the last Game of Thrones. So there's a lot of differences between the first season and the last season. One of them was that when we started this project 10 years ago, we wanted to actually sculpt everything in ZBrush, but due to time and limitations of 10 years ago, we couldn't achieve that because they originally wanted to do a ZBrush pass on everything, which was impossible. But in this new version of Game of Thrones, about 80% of it actually had a ZBrush pass. So we also got lucky enough to come back to revisiting some of our old models, like the Astrolabe, but we had to make new bands off of them. This thing was decided by these Astrolabes were designed by Rushton, which is an amazing concept artist. He was also hired to work on the first season of Game of Thrones, and he also did this iteration of Game of Thrones. So here is the artwork that he did. We were lucky enough that he was in-house at the time, so he would do the artwork there, and then he would pass it off to us. What we ended up doing was getting that same artwork and turning every single of his pieces into alphas. So everything from the dragon to the mountains, to the wall, to the filigree and the ravens, those were all images we converted into alphas. And after that, we would get those same alphas in a ZBrush and actually turn those into geo. Once we would have that turn into geo, this bottom band, which is a funny thing, because since I worked on it on season 1, it's exactly the same band from the first season to this new season. One thing that we like to do in this studio a lot is to reuse a lot of our old models. If we could actually reuse or modify anything, we would do that because it saves us time from remodeling it again. Cutting corners is very important in our industry, especially when you don't have the time to remake things. The funny fact about this, we did this version of the band different from our previous one, because before what I would do is I would bring in those old alphas just all together into this one band and then reproject it and then hand sculpt a lot of it. But for this version, for this version of ZBrush, it was updated and we could work in separate pieces, which saved us a lot of time and a lot of effort. Here's a breakdown on how we did each individual piece. We would start with our original drawing, which is the bear and the sword. Then we got lucky enough that they gave it to us in 2 pieces, which was the texture, or the color, and the line work. And what we would do is take that the color and put it into a Photoshop FX stroke. And as you can see over here all the way to the right, we would put these settings on it in the FX strokes, and it would give us this third picture, like a nice kind of bevel look to a model. Because normally when you bring in like a gray alpha, it just brings it in flat. But if you do this in Photoshop, it actually gives you a nice roundness. So it doesn't bring it in flat, it actually rounds it. We did that same technique also on the line work, but in reverse, and then we laid 2 of the line works together to give us this final blend.
And a big shout out to Max Ulichny, who actually was one of the pioneers in this process. So we definitely, he taught us how to do this for type, and then we adapted that for this sort of thing.
So the technique that we ended up doing over and over again is we do a 3D planer, like a regular planer, make it into a 3D mesh. After this, we subdivide it. Like I said, I like working really high res, so I subdivide it 7 times. You could probably get away with less. I love polys. Like I could use as many polys as I want.
Never listens. Always
I know.
subdivide.
I never count my polys. I overuse polys. So the next thing I would do is come to the texture map, add a new texture. The reason we do this is if you don't do that and you just bring in the alpha, you won't be able to see it. So we'll drop in our alpha, which we did. We figured out that 1.5 works best for this particular project, and that would end up giving us this bear. As you can see, it's flat, but you could really tell the nice detail in there. So after you do that, you hit apply displacement, and that actually gives you a nice thickness. I like masking the back and actually moving it a little bit forward, so like that it gives me a little bit of wiggle room to play with the model. After that, I go to modify typology, Z, and mirror and weld, and that gives us a nice bare model in a couple of minutes. So we ended up using this technique for every single piece on our new Astrolabe band, which saved us a lot of time. A happy coincidence was that it also gave us this nice kind of banding noise, which already looks like wood. So that saved us a lot of time in actually having to sculpt that detail in there. And we did this from every single piece, one by one. Then we brought it back into our band, and we just projected it forward, and that was it. And that's how we did our band. I know, using 3D magic, I know.
3D.
Ooh, thank you. Here is our dragon skull prop that we got to do. This is one thing that I'm really proud of because, like I said, when we started in Game of Thrones Season 1, we originally wanted to do a ZBrush pass on every single object and every single piece. But at that time, there was a lot of limitations. Like, you couldn't have like a billion polys like we can today. Like, we would just kill our box. And the lighters and the riggers and everybody else would start yelling at us to like cut that out. Like, you can't do that. But now we actually have a lot of talented people and a lot of great people that can work pretty fast. So we actually got a lot of stuff done. Like in this skull room, everything in here that you see in this scene was at least touched by ZBrush, like every single piece of wood, and except for the gears in the back. Here are a couple props that we actually got to do. There's a wolf. That doesn't have as much detail because it was a really background prop. We have a lot of other stuff that we actually got to touch and redo. We also had to do 2 passes for every single piece because our first pass was just to add detail. The second pass was when the dragon came to town and destroyed it, we actually had to make it look even worse and more destroyed. Here's a tree. This is one of the only pieces that was originally ZBrushed in the original Game of Thrones, but only the face was ZBrush. And this time around, we actually got to ZBrush the whole tree, which was amazing. Because that's probably been one of my lifelong fantasies, was to be able to do that tree, but at the time we couldn't do it. Here's Lyanna Stark. She was an Easter egg for the show. As you can see, she has a lot of nice wood details and carvings, and like I said, we were lucky enough to actually do a ZBrush pass to most of this stuff, so I'm going to show you how we did our Game of Thrones wood, like our wood carving technique and how it worked out. So let's see, Lyanna Stark. I'm going to try to do this really fast. Let's rush through this. Yeah, no.
files take to open.
I know. Millions and millions of polys in there.
There it is.
I know, and there's it in all its glory. Look at that. So what I was gonna show off is her lovely dress. What we love to work in layers. The reason we do this is because if our supervisor hates like a detail, we could actually remove it. We could actually remove that layer or change it or whatever we need to do. We do a lot of poly groups. So, wait, this thing's still loading? And it's thinking. There we go. Brushes. Wait, are my GOT brushes in here? No, they're not. So
You might have to load it up.
Oh, you didn't load, okay. So let's come to brushes. We actually had to do very specific, we actually got lucky this time that they gave us a whole 2 days for R&D so we could actually come with brushes. So in our industry, that's revolutionary. That's like insane because we normally don't get. That's a lot of time in our industry because we normally don't get that. So we actually made this nice serrated kind of brush that gives us this nice serrated feel. I did a more for Target earlier. Let me see. Let's go back to our brushes. Load. One of my favorite brushes that we invented was this splinter morph, because what this allows us to do is, wait, where am I loading? My brush is loading. It's okay. Just hit the big giant middle button. So wait. Oh, there we go. So what we ended up doing was making, wait, is that mine or yours? Sorry, we went over our time limit, which is not good. So we ended up doing a lot of like cutting, and then we made this new morphed brush. So like that, when you're actually doing detail, you're cutting in detail, and when you're morphing it back to your old piece, if you go too crazy, it actually adds more detail on the way back. So it's like while you're sculpting in detail, you're actually also removing detail, which is it's a very crazy way of thinking of the world. It's almost like saying I'm erasing, but instead of erasing, I'm adding more detail to my erase. After that, we made a couple more different tools to make it look more like wood. We like to add a couple of things, scratches and dents.
We created those using the vector brush technique. So we just went into a plane, sculpted the detail, and grabbed that and made it into a vector brush.
So a lot of the things that we like to do is, in the end, after we had our nice wood thing, we would go to our corners and just cut them off to give it a nice destroyed edges, because nothing's ever in a straight line in real life, like especially when you're looking at wood. So this is how we did our wood throughout the whole Game of Thrones, and we just did that throughout our whole world.
Yes.
And that's the final one.
Like sands through the hourglass, the time has evaporated. Here we are
I
once
know.
again for
I got the-
Elastic. Guys,
I got the smoke monster of Lost coming at me,
Yeah,
like halfway
right?
through my presentation. That was awesome.
Right?
I thought I was going to be like taken to like another
like a
room.
whole other realm. Well, you
I
already
know.
are. You're in the ZBrush universe right now, live and on the floor inside the Noman green screen hangar. Louis Tucci here live with the guys from Elastic. Another great presentation highlighting another incredible use of ZBrush for advertising and marketing and titles. Put your hands together. Yeah, absolutely. Kidding me? That was Joe Paniagua, Jose Limon, and Mike Dupree. Now,